Well, a few of you are still left. Somebody, I'm glad that you guys are here. I know lots of people have to catch flights. There's the game going on. So if you are, that's all right, come on in. If you are driving through Seattle, try not to drive through Seattle, at least until the game starts. My name is Grant Thompson. Any of you in the presentation I did on Friday? Couple? Cool. I work for MG Technology here in Seattle, actually on Bainbridge Island. Our offices are right across the parking lot from Harry's offices, which is one of the reasons why I get invited to speak at his conferences a lot. We're a cloud services provider, have been since 2003, before cloud was cloud. I'm a solutions architect, so my role really is to learn about all kinds of different technologies deeply, especially on the architecture side of them, how things work, and put new solutions together for our company, advise other companies, and primarily work with resellers to figure out what's best, whether we sell it or not, or somebody else sells it, whether it's Office 365 or not, and help you figure out what the right solution is for your customer based on things. To give you a little bit of history, the company was originally founded as a business intelligence development company and doing consulting. And how we ended up getting into cloud was we were building these BI tools for really large companies, but the market was very small. And so we thought if we could turn these things into a web-based tool and sell them to small businesses, we'd have a much bigger market, and rather than charging one price for it, we would rent it to them on a monthly basis, scale it based on their size. That solution's still in use today, so it's still going strong, but that led us to building out a data center and getting involved with Microsoft on the hosting side of things. So that's kind of my background. I do a fair amount of speaking, webinars. I do some things through SMB Nation. I write some articles for some different magazines. Been in Channel Pro and the Partner Channel and some of those other things from time to time. To give you a little bit of background on what this topic is, obviously this conference has been focused primarily on Office 365. What we're going to talk about this afternoon is all the stuff that kind of falls outside of Office 365 and how we can add things to make money off of either attaching to Office 365 or in lieu of Office 365. So is there anybody in this room who makes all of their money either by selling just Office 365 or selling Office 365 and attaching billable hours or services contract to it? Nobody. I actually know one guy. That's all he does. He sells Office 365. He doesn't even do any of the work. He just goes out and sells stuff and then contracts with folks to do migrations and things like that. So in order to differentiate a little bit, one of the things I'm going to talk about is hosters, and you could call them cloud providers. They are the AppRivers, the Rackspaces, the Intermedias, the Tri-Ventures, the groups. There's 1,000 of us or so in the United States. We have our own channel, as it were, and our own relationship with Microsoft. And one of the things that Microsoft has done with Office 365 is they put together a really nice suite, a really nice package of tools. They've made it really easy to use. But it's somewhat inflexible in terms of deployment. So one of the things that differentiates hosters, and the reason that Microsoft keeps hosters around, is because a lot of the hosters can be more flexible in terms of what they deploy. They're not bound to tying things into just these specific packages. They can sell things a la carte. They can sell things Microsoft doesn't. And they can do things that some of the large hosters, not just Microsoft, but some of those things that they won't do. I heard Robert Kring was talking about SharePoint Online and the number of site collections you can have, and people were asking about vanity domains. So a lot of the other hosting providers will do vanity domains where you have, joesplumbing.com, and maybe they have several that they want to do. with SharePoint Online versus the something.onmicrosoft.com. Support, Microsoft support, traditionally they shy away from end-user support. And it's not so much that hosters want to take that away from you guys, because that's a lot of what you do, but support is really key. You know, you talk to the folks at Rackspace, who's one of the very large hosters. You know, their tagline is fanatical support. Almost every hosting website you go to, they're going to talk about their support, because that's really one of the ways that they can differentiate, is by providing support. A lot of them will do direct support, so you can offload that. You know, the guy who buys this new Android phone, and he's got kids, and so it's 11:30 at night by the time he sits down to be able to try to wire it up to Exchange. He has questions. Instead of trying to get you guys up, they can call their hosting provider and actually get support to walk them through getting that set up. Or if they have some issue, you know, they're up late trying to get a presentation done and something's not working right, they can gain access to that support. Other things, again, from Robert Crane was talking about backup in Office 365. If you really mess something up in SharePoint Online, you call Microsoft, they can do a restore for you, but it wipes out the entire site collection back to the restore point. A lot of hosters will do item level restore of different products, so they offer more granular backups, more flexibility in terms of retention periods to meet compliance or specific business needs. The roadmap, I've been asked probably since BPOS came out in late 2007 and early 2008, aren't you guys going away? What's going to happen to hosted Exchange, hosted SharePoint, hosted Link? You know, I mean, BPOS is here, Office 365 is here. Microsoft's going to yank your licenses and you guys will be done. That's not the case. We have our own relationship with Microsoft. There's a whole separate group. There are conferences just like this with thousands of hosters there. All of us have long-term contracts with Microsoft. You know, we sign multi-year contracts for. So this segment of the market is not going anywhere, nor are most of the companies that are in it. They're all looking for ways to, you know, have that long-term relationship, not only with Microsoft but other folks as well. The other thing is we pioneer a lot of stuff. You know, hosting Office 365 and BPOS was actually created by all these hosting companies. When BPOS was brand new, actually before it was released, the program manager back then for BPOS came out to Bainbridge Island and sat down with me, and I'm sure he sat down with, you know, 30 other hosting providers, architects, and said, we're trying to build this thing, and we have some problems. And so they went and reached out to the hosting community to find out how those companies were doing it, how they'd solve those particular problems so they could roll it in. So the hosting providers are really pioneering a lot of things that Microsoft may do someday, or they decide that that's not part of their core business, so they leave it to third party. An alternative. We have a lot of people who come to us and say, love Office 365. We want hosted Exchange. We want SharePoint. We want Link, but I don't want Microsoft to have my data. So now you can have somebody else that you can say, oh, well, we have a relationship with X. There are also some issues depending on what kind of data center you're in. People have branch offices that are outside the country. If things end up in one of their data centers outside the U.S., sometimes that creates regulatory problems. So you can work with a hoster that can guarantee that that data stays inside the country. Control. A lot of hosting providers will give you a lot more control, a lot more administrative access. They can do things like dedicated SharePoint or dedicated Exchange. If you guys need to do anything custom, if you guys need to have more access to things than what you get through the Office 365 control panel. And then in terms of offerings, you know, I mentioned there's a lot of different things. So line of business apps we'll talk a little bit about. How many people here have businesses on Office 365 and they still have line of business apps on-prem? So, man, I need Raymond in here because you have only one. Only one. Well, that's good. So, again, I mentioned this in one of the other sessions. You know, my role is to learn all about all of this stuff. I'm not anti-Office 365. I love Office 365. I'm not all cloud and no on-prem. It really depends on the situation. And one of the things that Harry asked me to do was to talk about how do we solve all those other things? Because we've talked for days about Exchange and SharePoint and Lync. And those are fabulous products, and they're packaged well, and they run well. But what do we do with the rest of the stuff? What do we do with the Access application that their son's brother's cousin wrote 4 years ago but is core to their business? What about the dental practice software, medical practice software, law practice software? There is no cloud version of. Maybe they don't even make the software anymore. You know, it's 3 years old. There's no new version, and the business owner says, "I don't. That's my business right there. You can take my email, but that's got to stay here." QuickBooks. How many people have clients that use QuickBooks? Pretty much everybody's hand should go up because it's. I mean, nobody uses Microsoft Money. Do they make that anymore? QuickBooks. There are a few QuickBooks, official QuickBooks hosters out there. There's a lot of other companies that will run it in the cloud, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. So QuickBooks, when I say ERP, that's really Enterprise Resource Planning. It's a really long way of saying accounting software. It does more stuff than that, but I throw QuickBooks in there. It's really all just, we're talking about accounting and managing inventory and things like that. And then integration, tying things together. If you've got stuff in disparate places, could be in two clouds, could be on-prem and in the cloud, how do you tie those things together? So before I talk a little bit more in depth about line of business applications, anybody have any questions or anything in particular that they have a specific client problem or issue that they'd like to talk about? Good. So this, anybody seen something that looks like this? Windows 98. I pulled this off the web on Thursday. This is a piece of software that's still made. I won't tell you what it is. But this is a line of business software, piece of software. There's tons of it out there. You guys support it. You may not even know what those specs are for those requirements. So I was trying to come up with a good term. The best I could do was cloudify. How do we take this line of business app and turn it into a cloud app? Now, people use the term port, and I have that in here as well. There's a difference. I did software development for about 20 years. Porting an application typically involves rewriting code. I'm going to take something that's going to run on one platform and port it to another platform. I'm going to have to re-engineer that to work. What I'm talking about today is taking an existing application without going back to the developer and putting it in the cloud. And in that way, I've taken things like QuickBooks, practice software, medical, dental, whatever that is, putting it up in the cloud so that they have access to it from anywhere, and without having to rebuy the software or without having to engage developers to deal with it. So one of the things, core to that is we can essentially go to the customer and say, I can take this old software that you have that only runs on this older Windows PC, and I can make it run on your Windows 8 machine. I can make it run on your iPad. I can make it run on your Android tablet. Now, these apps may not be suited well to use on those platforms, so it may not be a great thing, but it makes it available to them to be able to access that. So depending on the software, that might be of real value to them. It might be like, well, great, I can use it, but it's not touch-enabled, and so it's not practical to use it. But anybody have people who bring Macs in? Usually it's business owners who do that. They go out and they buy their MacBook Air, and they show up and say, make it work. And they're using QuickBooks for Windows. So what do you do? Okay, so now you got to get parallels, got to get another license. How about we take QuickBooks, put it in the cloud, and then they can run it on their Mac, they can run it on their Windows PC, they can open it on their iPad if they want to, although it's not all that useful. So I will show you how that works. But essentially, it's through remote desktop services, remote desktop technology. There's a lot out there. Almost every kind of third-party hosting provider out there provides some platform for that, be it the straight Microsoft stack or Citrix application virtualization. All of that exists, and I'll show you a little bit about how it works.
Is part of that taking the existing machine and just capturing an image of it, spinning it in a virtual machine type thing?
Usually not. So the question was, you got to remind me to repeat questions. So the question was, would we do a P2V? Would we take the machine that this software is on, virtualize it, and then bring it up to the cloud? You could do that, and you might run into some scenarios where that's the only way you're going to do it, because kludging it back together again somewhere else may not be all that possible or practical. The thing that you got to keep in mind there is, can you expose the client software through remote desktop services or through one of these other things? Like, for example, if it's on a Windows 7 or a Windows XP machine and that's what they use, that doesn't have remote desktop services in it, so you're not going to be able to do that. But if there's like maybe a back end that's installed on something, you might be able to bring that back end in and run it in a virtual environment, and then install the front end, the client software, on a remote desktop services enabled server, and then expose that. And this will make a little bit more sense when you see it. Speaking of which, let's go. See, after seeing Raymond, I need to change my wallpaper from my baby to me. So I'm going to drag a couple of things over there. Figure out which way it goes. Okay. Anybody ever seen one of those? So there's an MSI. Here's another MSI. These are just installers. Well, it doesn't want to stay over there. And then I will bring this over. I'm not going to stay over there. That's all right. So this is a piece of software that I'd never heard of before. I went online, found kind of the clunkiest app I could find, downloaded it and set it up a few days ago, and I created this installer package yesterday. And so I'm going to run this. This is running on my local machine. Of course, I'm going to get user account control. I should just do this. See if I can get that to show up. There we go. So where did we go here? Yes. They should be duplicated now. Can they see both? Or see this? Let me try. That's all right. Let me reshare it here. Yeah, no problem. So that installer ran like that, right? Real quick. Of course, we were kind of distracted, but it put this icon on my desktop for timeline. And when I double-click that, it's actually going to launch a remote app session. Now, obviously, I could cache my password here so that it didn't prompt me every time. But what this is going to do is this is actually going to launch an RDP session. Type the username correctly. So user experience. First time they launch it, this is a lab, so we may get a few certificate errors because they're all internal. But the first time they launch that, in the background, what it's actually doing is logging on to a server somewhere in the cloud. So it takes a little bit because it's got to go through the typical login process. Once that happens, and you can control the settings for this, that session stays in existence, and so the user won't have that same delay on that first run. Most of the time, I recommend that they set those up to run so that that session lives Monday through Friday, if that's kind of their work cycle, and then those sessions recycle over the weekend, so that when they come in Monday, the first time they launch one of their cloud apps, it may take that extra 10 or 15 seconds, but during the week when they come back on Tuesday and they launch them, they fire up just like a normal app on the local machine. So it's kind of hard to tell, but this is not running on my machine. This is running in the cloud. And I've got a window open here, and I should be able to bring up another window and layer those things on top of each other. So this is one window from my cloud app. This is another window from my cloud app. That's my local link client, and it's in between, so it interlaces between. Anybody here familiar with remote desktop? Say yes. We don't have double start button. We have seamless integration back and forth, layered windows. We can copy and paste. We can print. And you don't have to do anything to set it up. Once that app's configured, you can deploy that MSI or an RDP file, push those things out to them. They can run their line of business app. You know what the biggest problem? Their crappy app crashes. So what the user does, they reboot their PC. And then they launch the app again, and they call you, and they say, rebooted my machine, and the error is still there. So we've taken away the complexity of having to teach them how to use remote desktop. They get the icons on their desktop, on the start menu. You don't have to teach them anything. Their printers show up. Their drives all show up. All that stuff just happens. But now this application, I can run it here. I can run it off my cell connection. I can be anywhere, and I can fire up my QuickBooks, my timeline, anything. And it's backed up, and it's highly available. And that server can go away, or that XP machine can go away. You can get rid of that if that's what makes sense for a particular customer. Now, would I do this with CAD? Absolutely not. Something that's video or graphic intensive, not going to be a great experience. Video will play, you can do it, but it's really not for daily use of that kind of an application. So there are specific instances where you're still going to go, oh, this has to stay on premise. There's just no way that we can get that out of. We have a lot of resellers in manufacturing, and those guys in manufacturing have like machine controlled stuff. So they're actually applications that are interacting with machines, and there's physical connections that have to happen there that we can't do in the cloud today. You just can't do it.
But this is an old Windows 98 type app. How are you running this on a Windows server?
So yes, and we and other cloud providers work to figure out, like with this, it was fairly easy, but there's app compat. One of our founding partners, who's no longer with the company, developed app compat for Windows XP Service Pack 2. He was the engineer from Microsoft who came up with the idea for it. So we have a lot of depth. A lot of these providers have depth in how do we shim these things, is what they call it. So basically they look at what's broken and they figure out how can we trick this into running on this newer thing. It doesn't always work, not 100%, but cloud providers will be able to work with you and say, well, let's spin something up, let's test it, let's see if we can get it to work. If need be, we can go back to the vendor, maybe ask them, is there a newer version? If not, can you explain what we might need to do to get this to run? And you can retire that old machine instead of investing in a new server. And then you could do you could do a P2V. You do want to be careful on licensing if you're P2Ving a client machine, an OEM machine, those kinds of things, just making sure you're in compliance with your license, because there are some restrictions, like OEM licenses, you can't move it off that hardware. So if you've got an OEM OS license, doing a P2V, you want to make sure that you have proper licensing to be able to continue to run that instance of the OS.
I was thinking Discovery
It does depend on the app, but this is RDP. This is not transmitting data around. We're doing video, screenshot, not video as in like an MP4 or something like that. So really it works very well. You do want to look not so much at bandwidth, but at latency. RDP is a very different animal in that it's streamed, and so some people will have a great bandwidth. They'll have a bit pipe, but their latency is bad. And so they go, I don't understand. I set this up. Websites load like that. My Exchange always stays connected and never drops. Outlook never prompts me that it's been disconnected from Exchange. As soon as they try to do an RDP session, it's we call it the white screen or gray screen. Things sort of freeze. They'll get that disconnect, reconnecting box will come up. So you definitely want to check on that before you do any kind of RDP stuff over a connection. We know the providers who typically have problems in Seattle and elsewhere. We have customers all over the world, and but you definitely want to do some of those tests ahead of time before you deploy any kind of remote desktop service.
And then you do caveats that say don't just run down to your local Starbucks. We're not going to guarantee that.
I would definitely tell people, it's important, but it does work from all those places most of the time. And so that's a real benefit to them to say, hey, if your power goes out, you can go home. If your internet service goes down at work, you can send your employees home or to Starbucks or to an internet cafe, and they may not be as productive, but they're not done. They're not down. And for distributed workforce, it makes a huge difference. A lot of people, especially during the recession, closed offices, put people in home offices, or are trying to scale back some of those expenses, and this can be one way that they can make those corporate apps accessible to their users from wherever their users may be. And it's all secured, all runs over SSL encryption, so even though there's no data going back and forth, even the connection, that monitor share that's happening there is secure, so nobody can intercept that.
Go back to the ODM thing seems to me to be a huge problem. 90% of the PCs that are out there, the guy bought this old Dell PC 12 years ago, and it came with XP on it. And so now if we want to go B2B, and we are working with an old app, which probably means we're working with an old computer, and you can't buy a license anymore. Now what?
So the best thing to do in that case is to try to move the app itself. And that's the way actually we recommend that you start is, do we have the installer? Even if it's an old CD that we need to install it, can we move it? Can we move that application onto a virtual server, a cloud server, so that we can run the application and be done with that old XP altogether? As cloud providers, we do have access to older versions of software. So we did a migration with a partner a couple of weeks ago. The customer came to the partner. They fired their old IT company, came into a new IT company, said, we really need help. Our accounting software, which happened to be Dynamics GP, is really old and outdated, and we haven't paid our maintenance fees in years, so we know we're not entitled to the new version, and we're closing this office anyway, and can you please help us? And they said, sure, no problem. We're familiar with that. We can take care of it. We'll move it to the cloud. It'll be great. They called us, and we said, okay, what version is it? It was GP 7.5 running on Windows 2000 and SQL 2000 with no service packs. And so we looked at the migration path, and it was a 4-version migration path, including OS and SQL upgrades. And so we went to engineering and said, we need a SQL 2000 box, we need a Windows 2000 box, because we didn't want to mess with their production software, because if you breathed on it, that stuff was going to fall apart. So we set up a mirror of their actual environment instead of doing a P2V, because their bandwidth was also, they were on a T1 line. So trying to suck this, half a terabyte of data up to the data center wasn't going to be real pleasant. So we recreated their environment, brand new Windows 2000, brand new SQL 2000, brought their databases up, installed the app. We have GP all the way back to 7.5, and we walked through all the upgrades, had them vet at each stage, let their accountant come in, print the financials, sign off on everything, move them to the next version, to the next version, to the next version. Now they're current on their licensing because all their licensing is month to month, and they have this app, and they close their office, and their bookkeeper now works from home. So, but she has access to that. They don't have to worry about it. If she dies, quits, gets ticked, they can shut her off like that. She has no access to data. We have access to lots of stuff. We have access to NT4 as far back as we go.
This is something you happen to have saved on a shelf, or does
Microsoft provides that. Well, I don't think NT4 we have access to, but back to Windows 2000 we have access to.
Microsoft provides?
Correct.
You talked about the margins and things like that. So, some of the models that you're talking about, like compensating salespeople, so from the days of getting from the space, right, putting everything in cloud, there's not as much margin, therefore, there isn't as much commission and that issue. Some of the things that you're talking about when you mentioned like the margin, higher margin, lead to other projects, lead to add-on and upsell and things like that, and you make up the gap in some of the things that you're talking about here.
Absolutely. So there's things like that are a project. So there's a lot of unknowns. There's discovery to do. Those things are billable to the customer, and it depends on how valuable that app is and how good you are and what kind of relationship you might have with your other cloud providers to be able to do that more reliably, especially if you have a vertical. If you're in dental, small medical, law firms, CPA firms, you're going to know the kind of software that they're going to need to move. You're probably going to do it once or twice and then be able to go out and repeat that over and over again and know, well, I can do that for a fixed cost, and I can do that for $500. I can move that app for you, or for $200 I can move that app. Or in some cases, like what's happening with email, if you know what it is and you know you can move it, then you move it for free, and then you charge them accordingly on a monthly basis for the cloud services piece that goes up there. There's real good margin in virtual apps, line of business apps running this way, virtual private servers, those kinds of things. And I'll talk a little bit more specifically about margin and pricing, those kinds of things here in a minute.
Can you speak a moment on line of business apps? Some of the corporations host it themselves, and the upside, downside of going with a hoster versus the company hosting it.
So, one of the things that comes to mind when I think of that is QuickBooks, because there's QuickBooks Online and then there's QuickBooks. That's somewhat of a unique case, but it's not terribly unusual. Anybody here used QuickBooks Online? Okay. Anybody like it versus the desktop version? No. So there's a case where Intuit said, we've got this great product. We're going to convert it to be a web-based thing. They equate that with cloud, and then that's what we're going to sell. You go to Intuit's website, you look for QuickBooks, it's QuickBooks Online, 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 online. You got to dig to find where are the desktop versions, because they really want that annuity revenue, and they don't want anybody to capture that but them. So that's a case where it's pretty easy to go to a customer who says, well, for $19 a month I can get QuickBooks Online, and you say, yes, you can. If you really want to go that route, you're going to probably be unhappy. If you want to check it out, do a trial of it. But I can give you that full Windows experience that you're used to. Yes, it's going to cost you a little more, but what's the benefit? Productivity to the company, the feature set, cross-platform, being able to run it on the Mac. That one thing, which I really didn't think about. I'm not a Mac guy. I don't have nothing against them. I've just never really used them much. And when I did a demo a couple of years ago, and I showed it running on a Mac, the room lit up. They were Like, oh my gosh, we can run Windows software without Parallels on a Mac? Sold, 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 sold. I have, 18 clients who want that yesterday. And so that's one of the things that I like to point out, because it really takes that out of the equation without having to go find some software that's compatible with both, because you're running a Windows instance on top of the Mac. And Microsoft's done an excellent job of coming out with RDP clients that are free for the Mac, for the iPad, for Android, and they... Yes, you can. Yes?
In the same scenario with the RDS, how does that compare or differentiate with the VDI?
So VDI versus RDS. VDI, I saw a demo by Scott Woodgate from Microsoft back in 2008 demoing what was then kind of brand new VDI technology. And after that event, I went up to him and I said, this right here, I think this is killer. Small businesses, we're going to be able to sell this all day long. And he said, no way. And I said, why? And he said, there's just no way. The cost of this thing, when you pencil this out, is going to make absolutely no sense. And I said, nah, you got to be kidding. And I went back, we crunched the numbers, we tried everything we could think of to make it work, and it just doesn't, because it requires the premium license for the Windows client. Microsoft does not allow us to license the Windows client in the same way we can do Windows Server. So the customer's got to procure that on their own, or obviously through you guys, through volume licensing. And then you pile on top of all of the resources that it takes, because those are dedicated virtual instances, whereas with remote desktop services, you have a server or a server farm that are hosting user sessions. So it's not a dedicated virtual machine that's running that user's desktop. VDI makes a lot of sense in larger healthcare, medical practices. I know use it a ton. It provides better security. It does financially make sense in a lot of those kinds of cases. But SMB, VDI, for the foreseeable future, it will probably get there someday, maybe sooner than I think. But right now, it's just not practical in any way, shape, or form.
And it's a requirement. If you got an app that won't run under terminal server, then you don't have a whole lot of choice.
That's correct. So if you have an app that will not run under terminal services, then VDI would be your only option to do that. We don't run into those too often, but they do exist, for sure. So I wanted to talk a little bit about Dynamics CRM. I think it was Tom from Microsoft kind of pushed this in a couple of his sessions. Obviously, there's Microsoft's Dynamics CRM Online. There's a lot of third-party hosters that do Dynamics CRM. We heard from Raymond talking about his company, CRM, business automation and things like that, and also Attached App talked about their kind of CRM light pieced together thing, which I think is fantastic, because a business that has no CRM is really missing out. Most partners, Microsoft partners, can get CRM Online through internal use rights. So explore that. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but there is some internal use rights for you guys to go out and do it. A lot of the hosting providers will give that and other services away to their resellers. So that's something that you guys can take advantage of. It's been around for a long time. It's actually really easy to use. It used to be really complicated, and it used to be really clunky. They've done a ton of work, mostly on the UI, similar to what they did with Office. If you go back to Office XP or Office 2003, it was much harder to find stuff, where the features are. They came up with the ribbon, much smoother user interface. And they also took a lot of the CRM sales cycle processes, like creating a lead, and narrowed them down to be very short, quick, easy to use. I've worked with salespeople most of my professional career. Salespeople hate to do data entry. It's a fact of life. I've never met a good salesperson who liked to do data entry. They may see the need for it and be disciplined at it, but just personality-wise, that's not something that they do. So they really narrowed that down to make it easy. It works across all devices now. There's apps out free from Microsoft for Android, for the modern UI in Windows 8 on tablets, for Windows Phone, iPhone, so users can have all of that stuff. Business process automation, it's got workflow built in. It can do things like, blast out emails to new leads. It can just do a ton of stuff. Super powerful. And there's a lot of third-party solutions out there where people have built, other companies have built solutions geared towards a particular vertical. So you can go partner with them, sell CRM online or from Microsoft or anybody else, and plug in this solution and have things customized in a way that fits a particular vertical that you're in. It integrates with SharePoint. It integrates with Exchange, both Exchange Online, on-prem, or from third parties, same thing with SharePoint. So your documents, sales sheets, price sheets, all those things, they're accessed through CRM, but they're stored in SharePoint. So when they go to SharePoint to work on that document or access it, it's the exact same copy of the document that they're accessing in CRM. So you don't have this duplication in both places. The Exchange integration is amazing, similar to attached app, talking about tracking emails and things like that. It'll do that. It spreads corporate contacts that are in CRM, can spread those across the entire organization. So they're on their mobile devices, in their contacts list. They can add notes right from there. Again, it's been around for a long time. It's little known in this space. You go to the ERP people, they all know about it and they sell it. You go to people who are really specialized in verticals where this is useful, they're selling it. But this space, I see few people selling it. There's a ton of CRM partners out there, so you can go on Pinpoint, find somebody who specializes in CRM, hook up with them so they maybe can do the consulting and deployment piece, and you can pick up the cloud revenue.
I don't know if it's changed recently, but the last time I tried to sell this, there's a lot of hoops I have to go through just to qualify as quoted. That just being an Office 365 partner doesn't get there. You've got a lot more qualifications to go through just to do it.
Not if
Maybe why you want to see it, not sure.
Right. So not if you're selling it through a third party. If you're selling CRM online, there are some hoops you got to go through in the MPN network to do it. Although they've lessened those for IT professionals, so check them out again. They basically have come up with an advisory program because they know that you guys maybe don't have the skill to be the consultant to help deploy, train, and even support long term. But they recognize that you guys have the ability to sell it. So you can get some commission from that, and then the people who are actually trained to do that support and consulting piece, they would hook you up with somebody like that who would handle that side of things, not the non-infrastructure side. Just like on the ERP side. Dynamics ERPs, Dynamics GP, which used to be Great Plains, NAV, SL, exists, but it's kind of dead. The three big ones right now. AX is huge. It's it's highly customizable, and that I think is probably going to be their flagship product going forward. GP is very flexible, works really well for kind of the upper small business market and the mid market. Those folks who outgrow QuickBooks, it's a slam dunk. It's a real accounting system. You can't delete stuff out of it. Like you can in QuickBooks. It complies with all the regulatory requirements and stuff for a real accounting system. No limits on inventory. You can email invoices out and do all that kind of stuff. And it integrates with Dynamics CRM. So customer information is all linked together, and inventory information is all linked together. So those solutions tie in. And I don't want you guys to think, gosh, I'm not going to go and learn how to deal with this ERP solution, but partner with folks who know about accounting. There's one sitting right over there. And they can help you sell it. They can do the consulting, the support, the setup piece, And again, you can pick up the cloud services fees for the infrastructure, the underlying stuff, and keep your customer in your realm, because just like with telephony, where we've seen telco providers eking into the IT space, you're starting to see these ERP partners pick up IT staff, resell Office 365 and other cloud stuff because they want to do the same thing. So if you can form partnerships that way with those folks, you can keep it in your family and share that revenue stream versus potentially having them go somewhere else. Or they go to the ERP provider and they may not do it, but they say our preferred infrastructure provider is these guys, and you want to be who those guys are. Let me show you real quick since we're here. I don't know what it'll look like, but on this little screen, this is a home page for Dynamic CRM. So this is kind of squished. We'll try to shrink it down, but this is out of the box, built in. It comes with things like funnel charts. You don't have to build those. It's got social built into it. It integrates with, there you go. So you can have all of those kinds of communications. This is a sales manager's view, so they can see all the kind of activity that's happening from salespeople, from their sales force for particular accounts that they care about. You can follow other salespeople. You can follow accounts and contacts. It does all automation and everything. And like I said, it's built for tablets. So the menus are all sticky. The buttons are big. So it's easy to use on the road, anywhere. It is web-based, but it also has that Outlook integration as well. There's an add-in for Outlook. So virtual private servers, anybody selling these? Who from?
Build my own.
You build your own?
Yes.
So are you building them on their premise, or are you got?
On their premise.
Okay.
I worked doing Intel hybrid cloud for a while. Now it's Instrus and all, but normally I'd bring in a box, virtualize and do all that.
Okay. Anybody else? Are they hosted, colo, or?
Similar to you, but on probably a lot smaller scale.
Excellent. Good deal. So when I talk about a virtual private server, I'm talking about a cloud server, not Zinstra, not an on-prem hypervisor that you're spinning up virtual machines in. So these are cloud servers. There's a zillion companies that sell these things, and you can do whatever you want with them. Azure, obviously you can spin up VMs. Amazon, you can spin up VMs and things like that. Those will cost you a fortune. You'll make very little money off of. If you look at all the other folks, they'll give you much better margins, but you get the uptime. You can deploy whatever you need, both for your infrastructure. If you need to run something and you don't want to have stuff on premise, or you have things you need highly available, you can throw them up there. And they can be $50 a month, $80 a month, $100 a month to run these things. You can get whatever resources, you can get whatever OS you need. Like I said, if you got something where you need Windows Server 2003 or Windows 2000 for something or other, those things can be done. They're typically dedicated, so they may be they're on shared infrastructure, but the machine itself is yours. You have full admin rights to it. You can install anything on it that you want, and it can help you be really flexible. Backup and disaster recovery is usually built into those things. Good question to ask. How frequently is my machine backed up? What's the retention policy? Can I customize that for my particular needs? Managed services, attach it to it, install your Kaseya agent on the VM, put it in there, and throw it into your managed services contract like you would any other machine. And again, you get admin rights to that. Upgrades are typically included, so your licensing is usually rolled into that for Windows, SQL, any other software that you need installed on it, particularly if it's Microsoft software, can come from the provider, or you can mix and match in a lot of cases. If a customer's got the right license, say, for SQL, but they need an upgraded machine, you could spin up VPS with Windows Server 08 or 2012, install their SQL license on it, and use it as a SQL server. We do a ton of hosted SQL where the connection actually goes back to on-prem and it's encrypted and there's no VPN involved in that. So you don't have the overhead of that. Downgrades. Other advanced services, anybody selling cloud failover, meaning I'm backing up this physical server on my client's premises. If their building burns down, I can boot that server in the cloud. Excellent. So that's a big money maker. People charging a lot of money for the ability to spin it up, more than just, rsync storage or something like that, where it might take you days to get them back. You can get them up and running much faster, and it's real important that you test that and build a thorough plan, work with your service provider to make sure that they can have access to it. We see a lot of people who will back up a SQL server and an application server, and then they go to do a test and they go, oh, that's right, we need a terminal server as well so that people can get to the client that connects to all of these things, but they didn't think of that at the beginning, so going through that test will allow them to do that. And many providers will allow you to configure those terminal servers or extra servers that are needed to make the failover happen, shut them down, leave them off, and there's either no fee or a small fee for those machines just being off during the failover, then they would bring those machines back up strictly for access. Active Directory, pure AD services, a lot of cloud-based AD. That seems to be a sticking point for a lot of people. Got to have a domain controller on-prem because I need to be able to do things like group policy, and I can't do it unless I have a domain controller. You can do that from the cloud, and you don't have to have a domain controller on site anymore and still have group policy and management and visibility to all those machines, not only when they're in the office, but from wherever those machines may be. Direct access is one of the ways that happens, as well as access to corporate resources that can be in the cloud, they can be on-prem, and there's no VPN required. Years ago, we had a zillion end customers who had VPNs. We had a whole group of people, all they did was manage VPN stuff. Today we have 0 clients using VPN. We still offer it. I have yet to run into a case where we can't do it some other way that's better, that doesn't require the overhead and the management of it. Anybody here familiar with Workplace Join? Okay, 1. So this is new, Windows Server 2012 R2. Yes, your client OS needs to be one of the more advanced OSs for a lot of these things to work. But Workplace Join allows you to have limited management to a non-company owned device. So now we can take a device, we can join it to the domain. It doesn't really join it to the domain. It's sort of this middle ground between not joined to the domain and fully joined to the domain. And we can assess policies to that machine. Not completely, but we get better management, we get better control. We can wipe corporate data off the device if something happens. And there's pretty broad support that they've built into it too. And you guys may not see it necessarily for a little while, but learn about it. Cloud providers are already starting to roll it out as an option. And if you've got on-prem stuff and you're able to roll out 2012 R2, you can take advantage of that as well. So Harry was talking about diversity. So all this stuff counts in that, but then I harp on people all day long to build a training segment. There was a guy I ran into yesterday who was a professional trainer who's looking for a job. He's an IT trainer. If you don't have a trainer on staff and you've got 3 or 4 techs, I recommend that you think about hiring somebody who's really good at doing tech training. Because you can sell that, you can put together classes, and then go to your customers and to other customers and charge by the head or just charge for a class, and you can build those things out at $150 a head. You can do an 8-hour day for 10 people and put somebody up in front of the room, and you can teach them anything, how to use Word, how to better use Outlook, how to use SharePoint. The training is so valuable. I remember with SBS, even 03 and 08, they rolled it out. Nobody used company web. Nobody used SharePoint because nobody knew how to use it. They didn't know what to do with it. Providing some end-user training for that is really valuable, and it's certainly a way that you can make money. Integration, looking for business processes you can automate. Learn about workflow in SharePoint. Workflow isn't scary. You can do it in SharePoint Designer. It's visual. You can even build them in Visio. If you're a Visio person for process, you can download SharePoint building blocks in Visio, connect them together, and then import it into SharePoint Designer, and it will create the workflow for you. So you don't have to write code in order to create a workflow, and you can automate all kinds of stuff. New hire forms, you can create a form, you can have it follow the process, it's tracked, it's visible, and you can really add some significant value to your customer by using SharePoint Online or wherever it's hosted. It really doesn't matter, or if it's on-premise, but really taking that to the next level and providing some good business value. Business intelligence, ton of built-in BI tools in SharePoint, Excel services, allows you to build things in Excel, charts, graphs, pivot tables, and publish them in SharePoint so it's on the web, securely accessible. They can't get to the underlying data. You can even integrate data with other data sources in some cases. There are third-party BI tools out there like Calabian charts that will let you look like a total pro, building these great dashboards for folks, and you don't have to write a lick of code or know anything except they want to know their aggregate sales for the last 12 months in a line graph that's in 3D. No sweat. Not as scary as it seems. Apps, anybody here work in development at all? No. So there's a huge greenfield market. How many have noticed in Outlook there's a little LinkedIn app at the top or a Bing app at the top of each email message? They re-architected Office 2013 to allow companies to build little small apps just like you download on your phone, but much simpler, into things like Outlook. And they can do things like you might build an app that looks for an address and shows a map of the address or gives them the option to do that, or looks for flight information, provides flight tracking. Anything you can think of, it could be something very simple. Those things can be built. Microsoft is going to be launching a huge campaign in the developer community to try to teach people how to do this. You guys are the people who see the business problems every day. Find the things, those little things, and then maybe look on PartnerPoint and find somebody who can actually write the little piece. But it's a store just like the app stores. So, $3, $5, $1, but you sell 100,000 of those things and split the profit with the person who wrote it because you brought the idea in. Again, we're talking about diversification away from IT. We're pretty much out of time, so there's my contact info. If you guys have questions about anything else, I'm happy to answer those now or anytime.